I'm finally free of all that baggage. From today, I'll be living with my parents at my house. After my husband, Tom, demolished my family home following my parents' passing. He bluntly said this to me as I stood dumbfounded in front of where my parents' house used to be. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind too? Hurry up and bring your inheritance to our house. I couldn't help but burst out laughing at his words. I see. That's what this was all about. What? Why are you laughing? Don't you guys know? Know what? Tom and his parents, my in-laws, looked at me quizzically as I laughed. I then revealed the truth to the three of them. My name is Michelle. I was born as the eldest daughter to ordinary office worker parents in Nebraska. I have one brother. A very normal family. I married Tom when I was 29 and we had 2 children. While working, I struggled with raising the kids, and before I knew it, I was already 55. My son, Jason, and daughter, Sarah, both adults now, have become respectable members of society. They live independently and are bravely tackling their new jobs. Now, it's time for a quiet life with my husband. It was a simple life, but it was happy. I thought we would continue to age together like this. My ordinary life changed dramatically one winter day. My father was involved in a traffic accident and suddenly passed away. He was only 72 at the time. Our vibrant father suddenly passed away, leaving our whole family in deep sorrow. Especially my mother, who was so devastated that she couldn't even bring herself to eat for a while. Mom, I know it's hard, but you need to eat. I repeatedly told her this. I know, but I just don't have the appetite. It feels like there's something stuck in my chest. My brother and I thought it was just her emotional state and watched over her for a while. However, she rapidly lost weight in just half a month. Concerned, I took her to the hospital. What? Cancer? I was shocked when the doctor announced my mother's diagnosis. It was advanced and inoperable, with only about a year left to live. I haven't even been able to repay my parents yet. Just as I was coming to terms with my father's absence, now my mother too. I was even more devastated than anyone else by my father's death. However, there was no time to grieve forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied upon. Therefore, it was up to me to assist my mother. I immediately told my husband, Tom, that I wanted to live with my mother. I couldn't leave her alone, both psychologically and physically, in her illness. But Tom's reaction was unexpected. What? We just finished the funeral, and now I still have to be bothered by your parents? Tom said this with a sigh of frustration. Don't talk like that. Why do I have to live with her? Isn't it enough to just pick her up and drop her off at the hospital? I think she's feeling lonely. If it's not possible, maybe I could live at my parents' house alone for a while? I suggested this. Then Tom responded angrily. What? What about my meals while you're gone? I'll come to cook, of course. And who will do the cleaning? The laundry? I was momentarily speechless. I intended to do what I could, but I wouldn't be able to manage everything as before. It hurt to be challenged on this. I couldn't argue if he said that my desire to care for and nurse my mother was selfish. Surely my mother would insist on not troubling me and say everything was fine as it was. But I desperately wanted to show filial piety. Fine, but don't expect me to help with anything. Tom grudgingly agreed. Though he had an arrogant attitude, he eventually gave in. Thank you, and I'm sorry. I thought his behavior was terrible, but he did agree to my request. I suppressed my desire to retort and thanked him. Despite some arguments, Tom and I started living with my mother at her house. We originally lived in a company-owned apartment provided by Tom's employer. Tom is an only child. Since his father particularly wanted to live with us, there were no plans to buy our own home. And we were scheduled to live with his parents eventually. For now, the company apartment was convenient for commuting and not a heavy financial burden at only about $300 a month. However, moving to my parents' house meant no more rent and a larger living space. I believe the cohabitation wasn't entirely disadvantageous for Tom. True to his word, Tom didn't help with anything, but I was glad to be able to live with my mother. She seemed well, but often appeared tired and spent much of the day lying down. I prepared my mother's meals, fed her, and managed her medication. Doing all this alone would have been impossible for her. Thank you, Michelle. I'm so grateful you're here with me. And we should thank Tom too. My mother repeatedly expressed her gratitude. Since I hadn't told her about Tom's harsh words, she was also grateful to him. One day, after my mother had gone to bed, Tom returned home. As I served dinner, I started about Mom's treatment. Tom glared at me and cut me off. I don't know anything about that. I told you I won't help. I, too, sometimes wanted to share my worries or seek advice. I just wanted Tom to listen. But his attitude didn't change, not after a month, not after 2. He constantly complained about living together, acting as if he had done something noble, and his behavior worsened day by day. But there was nothing I could say about it. The stress of worrying about my mother and being considerate towards Tom was building up. When the 1-year prognosis was approaching, my mother's health rapidly deteriorated, and she was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Even though I had prepared myself, I was deeply grieved. My brother's family and children came to support me right away, but in times like these, you really want your spouse by your side. However, Tom was laughing in a corner with his parents, not helping with the funeral arrangements. My brother took on the role of chief mourner, and we managed to prepare for the funeral. But Tom, who should have been sitting in the family section, was at the very back of the relatives area. I wish Tom would sit in the family section. When I said that, Tom replied, "Nah, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative, after all. But you are my husband." Then my mother-in-law chimed in. "He may be your husband, but he's not your mother's son. Tom is our son, he's an outsider." Right. Tom's parents are only us. It's enough if Michelle sits in the family section. Even my in-laws said that, so I kept quiet. Though customs vary by region, in our area, it's common for sons-in-law to sit in the family section. As expected, whispers of "did they divorce" started circulating among distant relatives because Tom wasn't in the family section. It's one thing for people to gossip, but it all could have been avoided if Tom had just sat there. Despite my slight dissatisfaction with Tom not sitting beside me, we managed to send my mother off peacefully. After the funeral, we returned home with my brother's family, children, Tom, and his parents. "Thank you for coming during this busy time," I said, expressing gratitude to my in-laws and serving them tea. They laughed and said, "Really, first your father passes away, and now your mother. These condolence gifts are really straining us. But at least it's all over now." I was stunned by their words. What did they mean by saying such things? I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. Desperately forcing a smile, I excused myself from the situation. I then overheard Tom talking with his parents. "It must have been hard for you, Tom, living with someone else's family." Yeah. I was really troubled by Michelle's selfishness. A husband shouldn't always give in to his wife. If you don't like something, it's okay to say no. I clenched my fist. Their laughter and conversation were unbearable, but this wasn't new. Tom's parents have always been insensitive and rude. When I was marrying Tom, his mother bluntly said, "Couldn't you find someone prettier? I can't expect good-looking grandchildren." His father joked, "Beauty bores after 3 days. With Michelle, you'll never get bored." Tom laughed, finding it funny. That's how disrespectful this family was. I felt like something inside me had snapped. Looking back, neither my in-laws nor Tom had ever shown concern for me, not during my father's funeral nor after my mother's passing. Instead, they ridiculed me. I felt sorry for imposing cohabitation on Tom, but now I questioned his behavior as a person. I had been too concerned about Tom, wanting only to take care of my mother. There was no need for me to feel so guilty towards Tom, especially when he never stood by me. As my anger simmered, Tom and his parents continued laughing and chatting. If my brother's family or children had heard them, they would have been upset, but fortunately, they were in the kitchen. Tom, his parents, and I were in different rooms, so I was relieved that only I heard the conversation. As I was thinking about this, I heard my mother-in-law's voice again. "Michelle?" "Yes?" I responded reflexively. "Can I have this?" Approaching me, my mother-in-law held my mother's handbag. Not understanding her meaning, I stuttered. To which she said, "Your mother won't need it anymore, right?" Tom suggested I take it home. She held up the bag, appraising it. It was incredibly rude, especially right after the funeral. I took the bag and said firmly, "No, you can't." Eh? Her eyes flashed with anger. Not so much about being denied the bag, but at me, her daughter-in-law, for defying her. Nevertheless, I stood my ground. "We have no plans to deal with my mother's belongings yet. We'll distribute them among family later." My mother-in-law turned red with anger. "What do you mean? Am I an outsider? Just now, at the funeral, didn't you say that even Tom was an outsider to my mother? How can you be family if Tom is an outsider?" I couldn't help but retort. Hearing this, Tom and my father-in-law also reddened. "What are you saying? Apologize to Mom. How disrespectful for a daughter-in-law to say such things." Their commotion drew everyone from the other room. After all the trouble of attending the funeral and cremation, I never thought I'd be called an outsider. "Let's go home, Dad." My mother-in-law shouted at me in front of everyone and left our house. Surprisingly, even Tom was angry and left with his parents. "What happened? Did you really call your mother-in-law an outsider?" Hearing only her side of the story, everyone questioned me. Indeed, taken out of context, it sounded terrible on my part. But I explained the situation to them. No one blamed me. Grandma and Grandpa should be more considerate of others' feelings. It's the same with Dad. That family has always been like that. My children sided with me, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive those three. Tom didn't return for a while after that. I didn't contact him either. I didn't think it was right for me to apologize, and I wasn't sure if I could forgive him even if he did. However, I knew things couldn't stay like this forever. One day, Tom came back. "Welcome home." Seeing his face reignited my anger, but I suppressed it and greeted him. Then Tom said, "It's been tough, hasn't it?" It was gruff, but in that moment of concern, I was taken aback. "Take the kids on a trip or something. It'll be a good change of pace." And with that, he handed me travel vouchers. I was speechless. Instead, tears started to well up in my eyes. Perhaps the children had a hand in this. Even so, the fact that Tom responded to their suggestion made me happy. I immediately contacted the children and arranged the travel dates. "Huh? Dad did? That's unexpected." The children were surprised by my suggestion. It seemed it really was a gift from Tom. Did Dad feel sorry for me, I wonder? I said this with a laugh. And decided to gratefully accept the travel vouchers from Tom. "Well then, I'm off."
Yeah.
"Take it easy. While you're at it, stay with the kids at their places." "Eh? I can't be away that long." "Don't worry about it. I'll relax at my parents' house, don't worry about me." Tom said this as he saw me off. Sarah happily welcomed me, so before the trip, I visited her home and then Jason's. Since I couldn't visit them at all while caring for my mother, I helped out a little by cooking and freezing some meals for them. "Mom, you're not getting any rest." "But thanks, it's a big help." Both of them were delighted to have my cooking at home. This was all thanks to Tom's suggestion. Then came the long-awaited hot spring trip. Together with the children, I relaxed in the hot springs. It seemed to heal a lot of the fatigue and sadness from caregiving and the loss of my parents. I ended up being away for almost a week, but both children returned to their homes with bright smiles. That was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while. Really, once in a while. But I wonder if he's up to something? Sarah joked with a laugh. "Don't say that. Dad must have given it some thought." I laughed too. When I got home, I planned to share all the memories with Tom, thinking of making our future life together happy, as we headed back to our house. However, when I arrived home, I was speechless. What's going on? The house is? I looked around in confusion, verifying my location. Despite recognizing the familiar place, the house that should have been there was gone. Then, out of nowhere, Tom appeared. Behind him stood his parents. Seeing me standing dumbfounded, they all smirked. "Tom. What's going on? I asked Tom. Then, with the same eerie smile as his parents, he said, I'm finally free of all that baggage. From today, I'll be living with my parents at my house. What are you talking about? Tom spoke arrogantly, and I replied calmly. Then he opened his mouth. Have you lost your mind too? Your family home has already been demolished. Bring your inheritance to our house quickly. What you've inherited belongs to Tom now. I see. The disappearance of the house was Tom's doing, and the reason was for the inheritance. After thinking of our future on my way home, what a betrayal this was. I was overwhelmed with frustration and sadness. But no matter what they did to the house, I wasn't going to let Tom have his way. I thought to myself, not a chance. Seeing the smirking faces of the three of them, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. My laughter, unrestrained, seemed to confuse Tom and his father. What's so funny? What a weird woman. Has she gone mad? My mother-in-law looked at me as if I were something bizarre. Facing the three of them, I spoke up. Don't you guys know? Know what? To Tom's question, I replied. First of all, I haven't inherited a single dollar. So there's no inheritance to speak of. After saying that, I started laughing again. They must have mistaken me for someone wealthy due to an inheritance. Their self-devised plan and actions, based on their own assumptions, were just too laughable. What do you mean? Explain yourself. Tom demanded an explanation. But I chose to remain silent. I felt no need to enlighten them. Before that, I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to cohabitate, do it alone. Refusing his initial proposal, my mother-in-law burst into anger. You helped your own parents with housework, but you can't do ours? There were reasons for that, as you well know. I agreed to live together. I told you I didn't need to live together. Have you forgotten you chose to live together because you didn't want to do housework? Tom and his mother were left speechless by my rebuttal. And anyway, demolishing my family home without permission. There's a line you just don't cross. I yelled at the three of them right then and there. And then, I left the place. Behind me, Tom's voice yelled, Where do you think you're going? But I didn't look back. I had to secure a place to sleep for the night and really didn't want to see Tom's face anymore. I immediately consulted with my lawyer, David. Demolishing a house isn't something that can be done so easily. The house was still in my mother's name. When I wondered which company undertook the demolition, an unbelievable truth came to light. Tom and his father had personally demolished it. His father's acquaintance in the demolition business helped, and they even rented heavy machinery, all well prepared. Moreover, the gift of travel vouchers was just a ploy to get me out of the house. The realization that I had been completely deceived brought me to tears of frustration and embarrassment. Is there any way to punish the three of them? I asked David through tears, to which he kindly smiled. Tom can be charged with destruction of property since he demolished a house in your mother's name without consent, and we can claim damages. Let's start by getting a proper apology from Tom and his parents. I nodded at his words. David promptly started the necessary procedures. A few days later, Tom called in a fury after receiving the legal notice. What's this content certification about? Oh, you got it? Since you destroyed an important house, you need to compensate for it. Compensate. We said we'd move into your family home. We demolished a house that no one was going to live in. Instead of compensation. You should be thanking us. Now bring the inheritance and come back home quickly. Tom arrogantly said that. Destroying it without permission and expecting thanks? Don't make me laugh. And about coming home with an inheritance. How can there be an inheritance when I didn't inherit anything? I shouted back over the phone. Tom didn't say anything in response, just fell silent. It seemed he was taken aback by my yelling, as I rarely raised my voice. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was precisely this. I had a whole year to spend with my mother. Of course, we talked about the inheritance. That's when I said, I don't want anything. Give it all to my brother. As a result, my brother inherited all the cash and securities. My brother then said that I could have the house. He lived far away and couldn't manage the property. If I didn't live there, he suggested renting it out. So, I was supposed to inherit the house. Anyway, either you and your father restore the house to its original state, or pay the amount written there. That amount. I'm trying to settle this amicably. Well, if you can't pay, I'll file a criminal complaint and sue you. I said firmly. I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd be this mad. Of course, I'm mad. Tom began to make excuses. He seemed to have thought that if my family home remained, he wouldn't be able to live with his parents. Especially his father, who had always wanted to live with Tom. It seemed that they were fond of Jason and wanted to live with him. Tom rejected this idea because it would make his commute difficult, but his parents thought I was the one opposed to it. So, he destroyed my family home to force me to move in with him and his parents. But how could I forgive him after being told this? So please, let me off. I didn't mean any harm. My dad's remorseful too. If he's remorseful, all the more reason to accept the settlement. I said this and hung up the phone. Tom kept calling and messaging, apologizing. If you're sorry, then transfer the money quickly. I pushed him away. I knew my family home couldn't be restored, but I had no other way to process these unbearable feelings. Later, I stayed at my daughter Sarah's house. This was known to my brother's family and my children. My brother, though angry about the house being destroyed, said, I won't interfere, but I'll help. Do as you wish, Michelle. Everyone condemned Tom's actions and supported me. A month passed without any compensation or damages paid. During that time, there was no contact from Tom. I couldn't keep imposing on Sarah forever. I wanted to get the money quickly to at least settle my living situation. Contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It all came to light because of something Sarah said. This apron looks like Grandma's. Murmuring this, she showed me her cell phone screen. I was shocked when I saw it. It was a product page on a flea market app. The apron Sarah said resembled my mother's was one I had made as a unique gift for her. What do you mean? This is Grandma's apron. I made it myself, so there's no mistake. Sarah said this and quickly started checking other pages on the app. The seller appeared to have recently registered, with 0 transactions and no feedback yet. There were nearly 30 items listed for sale, and to my shock, all of them belonged to my mother. I immediately had a hunch. It had to be Tom's doing. No one else but Tom, who demolished the house, could have taken my mother's belongings. I immediately called Tom. Hey. What's this about the app? The app? Tom sounded annoyed. Thinking he was playing dumb, I exploded with anger. Don't play innocent. You're selling Mom's belongings without permission, aren't you? Cancel the listings right now. Tom then sounded flustered. No. It's not me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over right now to get everything back. I hung up and immediately headed to Tom's house with Sarah. Where are Mom's belongings? As soon as we arrived at Tom's house, I called for him. Then, as Tom came out to greet us, I confronted him right at the entrance. I don't know. Dad. Tell the truth. Sarah joined in, supporting me and pressing Tom. Tom was visibly flustered. As we were talking, Tom's parents noticed us and came out. Oh, Sarah. You're here. Tom's mother smiled pleasantly upon seeing Sarah. Sarah, showing her anger, said to her grandmother. Grandma. Tell Dad to tell the truth. The truth? The belongings of Grandma who passed away recently, Dad seems to be selling them. Hearing Sarah's words, Tom's mother laughed. Tom frowned in confusion, repeating, Really, it's not me. Then his mother exclaimed loudly. Tom's selling them? That's impossible. But. Because it's me who's selling them. Her words made my blood run cold. Tom must have known. He looked at his mother with a face that screamed trouble. Despite Sarah's apparent shock, the mother-in-law seemed cheerfully oblivious. What did you say? It's a bit challenging, you know? I have to package things carefully, take good photos. Seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was selling stolen items, she cheerfully talked about the app. Cancel the listings. Those aren't grandma's to sell as she pleases. Sarah, turning red and teary, pleaded with Tom's mother. But she seemed displeased. What's the big deal? I finally found a hobby I enjoy. I use what I can and sell what I can't. It's good for preventing dementia, isn't it? I'm the only grandma left now, so Sarah, you want me to stay healthy and live long, right? She said this nonchalantly. Despite my pleas, there was no sign of remorse. But if talking doesn't work, I have no choice but to take action. Sarah, let's go home. But just come on. I dragged Sarah out of the house with me. And then, we immediately headed to the police station. I hadn't planned on filing a report for the destruction of the house, but theft is a different matter. When I explained to the police that my mother's belongings were stolen and being sold without permission, they quickly took action. And the mother-in-law's account on the flea market app was suspended. At least that ensured nothing more would be sold. On the way back from the police station, I called Tom. I got your mother-in-law's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you? You're complicit. No, I've filed a report about this incident. Please cooperate with the investigation. Tom panicked at my words. What? But we're family. Please withdraw it. Strangers, right? I still haven't received any compensation or damages for the house you destroyed, and I see no remorse from you. Tom was at a loss for words to my angry retort. But I'm not heartless. Despite everything, I have a history with Tom. Sighing, I said. I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. I want everything returned. And Tom, your father looked quite unwell. Has he been to the hospital? What? I'm not a monster, so I just thought I'd mention that. With those words, I ended the call. I had just seen my father-in-law after a long time. He was almost voiceless, and he had become so thin that it was hard to believe it had been only a few months since we last met. His complexion was beyond pale, it was deathly ashen. It was clear he wasn't well. But that family probably hadn't noticed. A mother-in-law nonchalantly selling stolen items, and Tom, who only acts tough in front of me. They lack any concern for others. The next day, Tom's father called me. I thought he might thank me, but it was the opposite. Why are you treating me like a sick person? Planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of me? I have to protect your mother and Tom from you. I'm not going to any hospital, he scolded. I was worried about him and this is what I get? I apologize for overstepping. I was just concerned. Humph. Unlike your parents, I'm not weak or short-lived. Don't make a fool of me. His words angered me, but a few days later, it seemed he finally felt off enough to visit the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Panicked, Tom called me. Dad has terminal cancer. What am I going to do? I snorted in response. I don't care. Remember what you said when I advised you to go to the hospital? I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Deal with it yourself. How could you? I never thought you would be so heartless. Who's heartless? Did you ever offer a kind word when my mother was ill? Reflect on your own actions. With that, I hung up. As expected, Tom's father passed away not long after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor negative feelings towards the deceased, but recalling everything he did and said, I couldn't shed a single tear. After his funeral, a will was found. Despite his previous claims of not being short-lived, I was astonished at how well prepared my father-in-law was. The house will go to my grandson, Jason. The rest of my assets will be split between my wife and eldest son, the will stated. I was surprised to see Jason's name mentioned. I recall my father-in-law had a particular fondness for Jason, always saying he wanted to live with him. He must have wanted Jason to live in the house even after his passing. For Jason, this seemed like a nuisance. You should renounce the inheritance. You don't need such a house, I told Jason. However, Jason was happy to inherit the house. The inheritance tax alone made it seem like there was no benefit for Jason. But I thought it was a troublesome legacy. If he's happy, I shouldn't say anything. As per my father-in-law's will, Jason inherited the house. My mother-in-law was delighted and paid the inheritance tax. It's only natural, he's our successor, she said. Well, she wasn't wrong. I felt a bit down, like Jason was taken from me, but then something unbelievable happened. Come to our house. Upon receiving that message from Tom, I immediately went to my in-laws' house. There, like me once, stood my mother-in-law and Tom, dazed in front of their house. On the property were heavy machinery, trucks, and employees of a demolition company. And before our eyes, the house was being demolished. What's going on? It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it. Jason appeared out of nowhere, looking satisfied as he watched the in-laws' house being demolished. Jason. What are you doing? Stop it right now. Even if we stop now, we can't live in it anyway, he responded. Jason, how could you do this? My mother-in-law and Tom pleaded with Jason. But Jason just laughed. Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Jason. Grandma, you were cruel to Mom too, right? Did you ever apologize? Jason's smile turned sharp as he glared at my mother-in-law and Tom. They both fell to their knees at his stern gaze. The heavy machinery continued to noisily demolish the house. I finally felt a sense of relief witnessing this scene. Later, Tom finally paid the damages and compensation, as per the inheritance. It turned out Jason had recovered the stolen items my mother-in-law took from my mother, and they were safely returned to me. Mom, you have me and Sarah, Jason reassured me, and I finally shed tears of relief. My mother-in-law and Tom lost their house and were left with nothing, now living in a company housing again. Tom and I left the company housing. Now that Tom and his mother have moved back into the company housing together, they've become the subject of gossip. With everyone wondering what happened. I received such news from a colleague's wife of Tom, who I get along well with, so I decided to tell her the entire truth, without any lies. They will likely live a constrained life in the company housing, but it's their own doing. Furthermore, after Tom's retirement, they will struggle to find a place to live, having to save up for it. I might occasionally ask a friend for updates on their life, just for conversation. I continued to stay with Sarah, but then Jason decided to get married. With this as a catalyst, he plans to build a house. The land of the in-laws' house sold for a good amount, making even that house useful. Mom, let's live together. Jason kindly offered. His soon-to-be wife also welcomed me warmly. I couldn't impose on Sarah's hospitality forever, so I gratefully accepted Jason's offer. Determined not to become a mother-in-law like mine, I look forward to living happily with my new family.